Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a Sky Sports cricket podcast. My name's Ian Ward. I'm joined by two former England captains, Michael Atherton and Nasser Hussain. And our analyst for today is Freddie Wilde of CricViz, who's also, Michael Atherton wants me to point out, the analyst of Welsh fire in the 100. Didn't go down quite so well. So I thought I'd get that out the way first. But we're going to be looking ahead to the forthcoming T20 World Cup in Australia. Of course, England are already out there. We'll explain how the tournament works, but they're playing a series against Australia. Then they'll play another warm-up game against Pakistan. They beat Australia in Perth by 8 runs. It was quite a thrilling game, Nasser, with a controversy thrown in there as well. Josh Buttler, perhaps, could have appealed, and Matthew Wade could have been run out perhaps for obstructing Mark Wood in his follow-through. Would you have not appealed, or would you have said, no, I'm having you?
Well, sitting at home on your sofa watching it, it was clearly obvious that it was obstructing the fielder, and I would have appealed. You have to appeal in the laws of the game to get the decision to go your way. But I'm thinking of Josh Buttler, and Josh Buttler would have been just looking up at the ball because he was involved in that moment as well. So I don't think he, live in the moment, would have seen the obstruction because he's concentrating on the ball, whether he should catch it, maybe where the stumps are, and maybe whether Mark Wood should have caught it, would have caught it. It was clear that it was obstructing the fielder. I think had he seen it and seen it properly, I think he would have absolutely appealed. I think he said afterwards, it's a long tour of Australia coming up, and maybe in a World Cup we would have appealed. I see these things that you're playing England, Australia, and it's still a massive game. And if you think it's out, appeal for it.
On the field, Ath, with the bat, Hales and Buttler were in blistering form, and that's the partnership they need to fire in this upcoming World T20.
Yes, I mean, there's a few issues around England's team, one of which are injuries and who's going to be fit and ready to go. Will Livingston, be ready to play? How will Wood and Wokes go? But the other issue was at the top of the order, where Phil Salt did well in Pakistan and is pushing Alex Hales, and people not quite sure which way England will go. I thought they would go Hales just because of his experience. His outstanding form in Australia in the Big Bash. So I always thought he was likely to still be ahead of Salt, even though Salt pushed him hard in Pakistan. And obviously the way that he played at the top of the order with Buttler yesterday at the opposite, I think means that's the way England will go in this tournament. He looked a bit off the pace in the field, I thought, in Pakistan. He dropped 3 catches, I think, didn't he? So that's an area that England will hope that he kind of gets up to speed on, but there's never really been any doubt about his ability at the top of the order. And clearly that was a confidence boosting knock for him, and also for Buttler, who was absent from all those games in Pakistan. And that was a key to England's victory yesterday, and is going to be a key part of England's World Cup hopes.
We'll delve more deeply into the side that England might select, etc. But Freddie, one of the interesting things for me was they dropped Dawid Malan down the order. Now you look at the impact that players have in games, etc. Is that the best way to use Dawid Malan, or do you think that was just simply they wanted to make sure that Stokes got to go at number 3? It just seemed odd seeing him sit there as everyone else was wondering how to bat ahead of him, including someone like Sam Curran.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to the fact teams try and think more about roles rather than positions in the batting order. And Dawid Malan is carded at number 3, and in most games he will come in at number 3. But in games when England got off to very fast start, like they did yesterday, 100-odd run after 10 overs, the game was in a situation really where it needed someone to come in and start quickly, and guys who can maybe clear the ropes more easily than Malan, who's a slightly more traditional player. Now, Malan has shown a lot of improvement in the last 12 months at starting faster, and there is an argument that maybe he was the best person to come in at number 3. But I think England were probably looking at it and thinking Stokes, Brooke, Moeen, these guys who we know as more explosive players, come straight in. It doesn't matter what number they're batting at. It matters about your entry point in terms of the point in the innings. And that's why Malan slid down. It didn't necessarily work yesterday, but I wouldn't say that made it the wrong decision.
Did you forget about the WhatsApp you sent me 2 weeks ago when you quizzed me when I had Sam Curran as 8 in my side? It was just a debate with Ian Ward, actually, who I'd have at number 8. I didn't actually pick my side then. and you WhatsApp me saying you would have Curran ahead of Chris Jordan. You're joking. And then yesterday I saw you bigging up Curran at 8 ahead of Jordan. What happened there?
Well, I think, you know, what happened is that in the last few weeks, Sam Curran has been excellent. Jordan's obviously coming back from injury. And I think a couple of weeks ago, I think I would have had Jordan as that man at number 8. Sam Curran has generally been seen as some back top of England, or top 7, so to speak. Harry Brook's emergence in Pakistan meant that I think it became a lot harder for Curran to fit in the top 7. But since then, he's been bowling so well in difficult periods and at the death, which is obviously where Jordan generally would bowl. And I think it's given England a little bit of a headache around that number 8 spot. I previously saw it as probably Chris Jordan v Chris Wokes, but now I think it's Jordan versus Chris Wokes versus Sam Curran. So I think we'll wait and see what happens there. But Curran could well slot in, Nash, but maybe you were right 2 weeks ago.
Could you, is there an argument that you could have both? I mean, Ben Stokes, is he a shoo-in to England's T20 side? It's quite interesting, Stokes, isn't he? Because he hasn't played much T20 for quite some time. On the plus side, you're thinking it's a big tournament. He's a big game player. Absolutely, you want him. But if you just look at this format of the game, which is kind of separating itself from other formats, I suppose, you'd say, well, he hasn't played that much. And could you therefore think maybe Milan 3, Brook 4, and then you can fit in Curran and Jordan as well? Or do you just think that Stokes, you know, his big match temperament, the way that he plays in these tournaments, you just absolutely want him? He's a shoe-in there.
There's a strong argument for that. I think that they will definitely start with Stokes. I think we're all probably in agreement of that, you know, for all the reasons you mentioned, that. I think also he's a player who's probably particularly well suited to Australian conditions. The pace and the bounce of those pitches should suit his batting. I think he will start the tournament. But I think, you know, if Stokes has a few quiet games, then, and if Curran is on the bench, which he could be, that debate will definitely gather some momentum. But I think they'll start with him. But yeah, it's a tough call, right? Because Stokes has hardly played much T20 cricket in the last 18 months, whereas Curran's been playing around the world and doing fantastically well. So yeah, it's definitely a live debate.
We'll go further into what England may or may not do in terms of their lineup and their options available. But in terms of how the tournament works, there's some pre-qualifying first, which starts on the 16th. So Group A, Netherlands, Sri Lanka, UAE, and Namibia. Group B, Ireland, West Indies, Scotland, and Zimbabwe. They play each other in the group, and the top 2 go through into the main World T20. How does that impact England? Well, their second game is against the runners-up of Group B, and their final game in group stages is winners Group A. You would think that is probably Sri Lanka to win Group A and possibly Ireland to come runners up to West Indies. That's not necessarily a shoo-in that West Indies will win that group, Af?
I think it's very difficult to predict, you know, that there could be upsets. I mean, A, because of the nature of T20, which is the format of the game, which is more likely to provide an upset in any case. And B, obviously, it's a very different looking West Indies side from that we've seen in recent tournaments. And because my man Shimron Hetmeyer refused to get
his flight,
so he's not there.
Right.
So I don't think he refused, Ath. He missed.
Well, I don't refused. He didn't make the flight. Which is a blow because A, I'd like to see him there, and B, he's a mighty good player. I think it's difficult to predict. You know, as you say, you'd think Sri Lanka would win that group. The other group looks more tricky to me.
England's group looks tough, doesn't it? Because you've got Australia, who I'd say are the favourites, the winners of the last time in the UAE. You've got New Zealand, who are runners-up, who they beat in that final. And you've got Afghanistan, who can beat anyone on their day. Sri Lanka, possibly, if they win their group, who are Asia Cup winners and playing a lot of good cricket of late. So, you know, it's a sort of tournament you have to hit the ground running, and you only need a bad over or two and it goes in the other direction.
I think it looks quite an open tournament to me in any case. I know that the odds, there's no complete favourite, is there, on the book? I think Australia may be a marginal favourites at 3-1 or something, but every side looks to have some weaknesses. I would say Australia on home turf are probably favourites. But if you think how that last World T20 went, although they won it, you wouldn't say that, you know, the way England smashed them in those group stages, you wouldn't say that they were across the board and the outstanding side. And India obviously missing Bumrah. So it looks quite an open tournament to me. And I wondered whether, you know, there might be a good case for somebody like South Africa as being a decent shout from the outside. If you said that on the book, India, Australia, and England were kind of the three favourites, it might be a tournament where somebody just kind of comes on the outside. But it looked quite open to me, generally, I would say.
India's issue has been ICC events, really, and that mindset. I think they've only lost one of their last 18 bilateral T20 series. They've been going around beating everyone with a variety of players. They've rotated and rested. And obviously they have hugely experienced T20 cricketers from the IPL and high-class T20 cricketers as well. But they've played some timid cricket in world events, almost gone into their shell. And whether they can keep up the sort of bilateral, I don't know if there is a different mindset from a bilateral tournament to a world event where you suddenly start playing a bit fearful cricket. They definitely did in the last one in the UAE, and that especially in the power play, especially at the top of the order. So they've got to keep that sort of hitting potential with the likes of Rohit and Rahul and Syria. Kumar Yadav has been in unbelievable form. They are missing two, you know, great cricketers in Bumrah and Jadeja, who are massive assets for them, but they've got to keep the same mindset they've had in the last year or two in bilateral events.
Just jump in there, Nasser, and say I think that the absence of Bumrah in a way should mean that India need to be even more positive with the bat. You know, Bumrah is probably the best pace bowler in the world. He led them huge defensive ability with the ball. You now lost that, and you're thinking you probably need to score 10 more extra because you normally have Bumrah in your attack. And I think in a way it should hopefully embolden India more to actually say we've got, you know, previously we were aiming for 180, we're now got to get 190, 195. So I agree, that's going to be really interesting because since Dravid and Rohit took over, obviously, been a new set of leadership there. They have played more aggressively, and I think the absence of Bumrah should mean they do that even more so now in this World Cup.
Freddie, when you're looking down at the various teams and you're working out some of your impact ratings and all of that sort of stuff, how does it differ in terms of the cricketers you think will do well in Australia conditions as opposed to, say, the previous World T20 in Dubai, UAE type?
It's a good point because I think you couldn't really go from somewhere more different to Australia, really. And the type of cricket we saw in the UAE is likely to be considerably different now. In Australia, I mean, firstly, obviously the toss last time was a massive factor. We all spoke about that, you know, as a win the toss, win the game. That's something that generally is the case in the UAE with teams who like to chase. The dew sets in a lot in that part of the world. We're unlikely to see that in Australia. Scores are likely to be higher in Australia. Rates generally, I think you see average scores are around 10 to 15 runs higher in Australia than they are in the UAE. There's obviously more pace and bounce. I think we'll see high-paced bowlers come into the equation a lot more. So the nature of cricket will be considerably different. I think really that will mostly be evident in terms of batting. You want guys who are strong back foot players, players who are strong against pace. Whereas in the UAE, it was more about low bounce, low hands, being able to negotiate spin. So I think there's going to be a clear difference there. And as a result, different teams will come to the equation. I think Ash was right to point out South Africa. They're a team who I think really will, probably the outside of Australia, England and India, they're the dark horses for this tournament. And I think they've got bowlers and batters who should enjoy conditions.
If we show you England's squad that they've taken to Australia, so they've already played that one game against the Aussies in Perth. We've mixed it into batsmen, all-rounders and seamers, etc. So the names are there for you all to see. There are still, I suppose, Livingstone is a very key one in terms of his fitness, Nas, and how, if he is fit, how he fits in and do all the pieces fit around him. Is he a dead cert for you? How do you see England's bases being covered if they are all fit?
I think with him, it is a fitness thing. If he is fit, and you know, we're only as we sit here now, 10 days away, 11 days away from England's first game. So I think he needs to have played a bit of cricket. Otherwise, you're leaving someone out who has played cricket. That's why Stokes has moved up. Another reason Stokes has moved up to number 3 in the first game. So he gets into my side just because the dynamic of someone coming in low down the order. You know, I've spoken to Freddie and various analysts about this over the years. when we started doing T20, everyone spoke about number 7. Don't worry about your number 7. They only face 7 deliveries, so you might as well play the extra bowler. But actually, if you have a number 7 like a Kieran Pollard in domestic and franchise cricket, or a Livingston or a Moeen or a Stokes or whoever, if you have that extra batting depth, that it means the top 6 can absolutely go for it. And that's been an issue for India a little bit. They not had that many all-rounders, so their batter's an issue for Pakistan, definitely. With Babar and Rizwan, they're so worried about their depth to their batting. 20 overs becomes a very long time. With England, with all their batters, 20 overs, you can go from ball 1 with Butler and Hale. So for me, Livingston does play, and then you may have to play, for me, you have to play your best 4 bowlers. But the one thing you have to put in those best 4 bowlers, and Freddie touched on it earlier, is death bowling. Because England have lost the last 2 World T20s because of their death bowling. They were bossing the tournament in India, and then Ben Stokes bowled those 4 deliveries to Carlos Brathwaite. They were bossing the tournament in the UAE. They would look the best side, hammered Australia, and then Jordan bowled that 17th, 18th over against New Zealand, and it was taken away from them. So their death bowling, whoever it is in those 4 bowlers, you have to have a very, very good death bowler.
Well, on that topic, Ath, I mean, Sam Curran yesterday against Australia was excellent bowling in the latter stages. You know, Stokes, as Nasser's mentioned, has experience of doing it. So has Chris Jordan. You've got Wokes that played yesterday as well. Do they have better options or more varied options in that department now than perhaps before?
I would say England's squad generally is a squad of bowlers who are, they front-loaded, if you like. They're bowlers who bowl more at the start of a game, and which is why I suspect Jordan will be the pick. I mean, if I remember Nasser's side, he had Jordan in it, and the debate, if we assume that Stokes is a shoo-in, then the debate comes between Jordan, Wokes, and I suppose Sam Curran. And Wokes is the one that you would say bowls more or better at the front end. You've already got Mark Wood there, and you've got Reece Topley, who will bowl with the new ball. And that's why I suspect that Wokes is the one who won't play, and they'll go with who they perceive to be the better bowler at the end, whether that's then Jordan or Curran. And obviously Jordan, is coming back from an injury himself. Sam Curran's been going well, but I suspect that will be that key position there at 8 is going to be which bowler they think bowls best at the end of the innings. And, you know, Jordan's had his issues at the death. He's bowled well, but he's occasionally gone round the park. I thought he bowled pretty well in the summer when he played before the injury. So probably that would be my pick right now. But, you know, there's a couple of games, 3 games yet before they have to play Afghanistan in that pipe opener.
Who are England's best death bowlers statistically?
Well, it's difficult because you can break it into 2 halves, and the guys who bowl at the very back end, which is often Jordan, have slightly higher economy rates than, say, someone like Topley or Sam Curran, who sometimes operate in sort of 18th, 19th or 17th, 18th over. So it's quite hard, but I think Jordan's the one who has most pedigree in doing it. But Sam Curran is someone who consistently seems to sort of somehow turn up. You know, it's almost like he's got an unconventional method. Yesterday, the way that he went to the pitch with his slower balls worked out really well. He brings a left arm angle. So I agree with that. I'm torn between the 2 of them. It's very tight. I'd probably go with Jordan just because he's done it more often. But yeah, it's a difficult call.
Well, let's just confirm what Nasser has selected. So this will be the starting 11 you think
by the way,
Afghanistan.
Can I interrupt? Atherton wrote in the Times the next day, and he picked his side, which was exactly the same side, by the way. I notice he's also copying me now with a little bookshelf number behind him. He's changed his background. So, you know, have a mind of your own, Atherton, please. He had the same side.
He's got proper books on that
my
bookshelf, not the Beano.
Mr. Ben books on.
Right, Hussain, your side was, just to be clear, Butler, Hales, Malan, Stokes, Brooke, Moeen Ali, Livingston, assuming that he's fit and recovered from that ankle injury, Chris Jordan, Mark Wood, Rashid, Topley. Do you think that's what it's going to be then?
I think Matthew Mott said after Pakistan that he wanted Stokes at 4. He was pretty clear about that. You know, Brook, in the way he's played in Pakistan, is a shoo-in at 5. Moeen is a wonderful cricketer, full stop. He captained brilliantly. The other thing he said, I mean, there was a debate about Salt. The other thing he said was, no, we spoke to Joss about the captaincy thing. Does Joss want to, like he did in the 100, does he want to stand at mid-off and be closer to his bowler? And they felt, no, if you have Stokes and Ali out there, Buttler can keep, and there's enough captains out there. So Buttler will keep, which sort of moves Salt out of the equation. So really, you know, Livingston for me has to play if fit. So that's what I think they should go. Rashid Wood will be brilliant in this World Cup. You know, as he was in the first game against Australia, he just gets good players out. And ground dimensions, I think, is something we haven't touched upon. In this tournament, there's going to be so many different ground dimensions. If you're playing at Adelaide, where it's square, you know, shorter. If you played yesterday, it looked like they wanted to be bowling into the pitch like they do at Cardiff. Wood can do that role. So I think that's the side, but they could surprise us all or just leave Livingston out for the first game because he's not fit and ready. And that will solve a problem where you could play Curran and Jordan.
And Stokes Freddie's an interesting one for me in terms of his role definition. When I've watched him play for England in T20 cricket, I'm sort of, what are they asking him to do here? What is his role in the side? Yet there seems absolute clarity when he plays for Rajasthan. Just from your viewpoint, what have you seen that Rajasthan have done to get the best out of him?
Well, he opened the batting for Rajasthan. He actually opened with the batting with Jos Buttler. And I think if I was going back in time and I was making a decision for England 6 months or a year ago, I think I might have gone down that path and used Stokes at the top of the order. I think Stokes and Buttler as a right-hand, left-hand opening combination solves a huge number of problems. And that's a seriously formidable pair. Now, they obviously didn't go down that route. Stokes wasn't playing that much in T20 cricket at that time. I think they were trying to manage his workload, etc. So now it's sort of left them in the situation where they're trying to get him higher up the order, because I think that's where he's better suited. But of course, you've got Buttler, Hales, and Milan who are locked at 1, 2, and 3. So the highest you can get Stokes is 4. I think he'll probably do quite well in this World Cup. I think it's still a difficult role coming in the middle order, but I think conditions will suit him. That pace and bounce is what Stokes enjoys as a batsman, and I think as a result he'll probably do all right. But it's a very different thing to coming in the middle order. He's not been playing much T20 cricket, so it will be a real test of his credentials as a player to come in and immediately do well there.
How important will Adil Rashid be, Ath?
Oh, massively important. I mean, he's been the mainstay of England's white ball cricket. You could argue he's been amongst, if not the most important players in England's white ball revolution, since 2015 World Cup. He looked to be probably not quite at his best in Pakistan, I would say. Beautiful googly, yesterday to start things off. Wrist spin goes well in Australia, goes well in T20. I mean, he is absolutely central to England's hopes, I would have thought. And he bowled pretty well yesterday, and they'll be clearly hoping he has a fantastic tournament. He's absolutely vital.
Let's have a look how England have gone through the various World T20s. Of course, we started off in 2007 in South Africa, and then we've gone right the way through to 2021 in the UAE when they were knocked out by New Zealand. Won it once in East Indies, a famous victory in Britain. I was looking at that, Atherton, looking at 2007, and how perhaps we didn't quite realise just how much that tournament would fundamentally change cricket, with India getting their teeth into it and the advent of IPL, and now look where we are. Yeah,
I mean, if you're talking about the modern game, I don't think there's been any more influential moment than the start of the IPL, that first IPL auction, when it seemed to me from that moment the game was going to fundamentally change, that Test cricket was going to struggle thereafter, and international cricket was going to be threatened or supplanted, whatever word you want to use, by domestic cricket. And then, of course, the World T20 in 2007, when that India-Pakistan final happened. So that confluence of those two things was a complete game changer, really, as far as the as far as world cricket is concerned. And it's been a good tournament ever since, really. You know, it tends to be short and sharp, and extremely entertaining. I mean, the one thing you would say is if you took the kind of ICC events of the formats, the World Test Championship, which is obviously relatively recent, and then the 50 over World Cup, you'd say probably that the best team, you know, a test match, the best team will come out over 5 days. Generally, the 50 over World Cup, the best team has won. More often than not, the best team wins. And one thing you couldn't say about the World T20 is that, but that adds an element of uncertainty, unknowability, surprise, you know, which is what sport revolves around, really, that kind of element of uncertainty. You don't always want to go into it knowing what the outcome is going to be. And I'd say the World T20 is probably the least predictable of all the ICC events, and I suspect that will be the case this time as well.
Well, the World ICC events, the white ball stuff, Nasser, there's a lot of them these days. They come around thick and fast. 50 over World Cup in India next year as well. Yeah,
they are. To be honest, I enjoy them. You know, we work on them. I enjoy the World T20 for the reasons that Ath gives. It's short, it's sharp. I mean, who would have believed in the conditions that we had in the UAE that you'd have Australia and New Zealand in a final? You might have thought it'd be India, Pakistan or whatever. It was Australia and New Zealand. They are hugely unpredictable. I agree with that. The 50 over World Cup, really, you can see throughout the tournament who's going to end up winning it. I mean, you know, although we had a very close one last time that went to a super over, you look like England looked the best side in that tournament. Whereas this one, you can have four, like I said earlier, you can have 4 bad balls and the tournament's taken away from you. You can have 1 bad over, and that sort of unpredictability about it makes it very, very watchable. Obviously, that big game is going to be, it starts with Australia, New Zealand, but then a couple of days later, it's India, Pakistan at the MCG. And they always have one of those, and that is one of the most watched sports events around the world. So I enjoy ICC events, and I enjoy this tournament. And Australia is a great place, you know, although they're having the El Nino effect again, I see. So weather could play a part as well. Could be a wet start. So the other good thing about this tournament is that you have different conditions. You know, Perth and a drop in, and then Melbourne, and then you go up to Brisbane, Sydney that may turn a little bit, you don't know. So you have a variety of different conditions and you have to adapt to them. Whereas the UAE was just very similar conditions throughout.
Right, Freddie, England's first game is against Afghanistan. What sort of challenge will they provide for England? Captain Mohamed Nabi, there's a few names that we know. Headline act is Rashid Khan, but he can't do it all on his own. What sort of challenge will they be?
Well, spin is obviously the first thing. Rashid Khan is obviously probably the best T20 player on the planet, but he's also going to be supported by Mujib Rahman, who's a sort of mystery spinner. They could also pick Qais Ahmed, another leg spinner. So there's going to be a lot of spin bowled. Of course, the game's being played in Perth, where the boundaries are slightly smaller straight, and generally it does a fifth quick, so that might negate that slightly. I would say that they have got a couple of pace bowlers for the first time, Afghanistan, who are worth keeping an eye out for. Faruqi, who's a left-arm swing bowler who can bowl quite quickly, and Naveen Al-Haq, who has quite a few slur balls. He's done well in the blast over here. So those two add a bit more depth to their attack. And then with the bat, I'd look out for Ramanullah Gurbaz, who's an opening batsman also, who's done well on the T20 circuit, scores very quickly in the power play. I think that given the conditions in Australia, they're not going to suit Afghanistan particularly. They would be a more dangerous team in Asian conditions, but they've got match winners throughout the team. Najibullah Adran, another powerful in the middle order. So England are obviously going into that game as favourites. But yeah, Afghanistan have got some dangerous players to keep an eye out.
Well, the other teams we know England will be playing, of course, is Australia, New Zealand. They could be supplemented by the likes of Sri Lanka or Ireland, depending on how the other groups work out. Let's have a look at New Zealand, Ath. But some familiar names, and they're always there or thereabouts, it seems, in ICC events. And the conditions will not in any way put them off.
No, as you say, extremely consistent. I just had a sense over the last 6-12 months whether a few of their players are not quite at their peak, and I wonder about firepower with the bat in Australia for New Zealand. I mean, you know, they're going to be competitive. I just wonder whether they've got enough firepower to make it to the final as they did last time. And I would have said in England's group that England and Australia are the favourites to go through in that group rather than New Zealand necessarily. But, you know, aiming to prove wrong as always, New Zealand.
Australia, when you look at them on paper, they are, of course, the defending champions. Finch, who we're not quite sure actually, Nasser, where he's going to bat. He's been batting in the middle overs, certainly did that in that first game against England in Perth, but has said today, I think, that he will go back to the top of the order. So Finch, Agar, the bowlers interest me though. You got Hazelwood, Richardson, Stark, Stoinis, the all-rounder, and of course, Pat Cummins. I mean, they are a very, very good side on paper. Do they lack? I mean, Zampa is very, as Rashid is for England. Is Zampa that important to Australia as well?
He is, yeah, in those middle overs because, you know, they are very much in phases. Hazelwood up front, Cummins, Stark, they have phases of bowlers. And then in those middle overs, Zampa comes in and he always bowls very, very well for him. You know, he has been a solid performer and a quiet performer for a number of years now in T20 cricket for Australia. They look a very, very strong side. And don't confuse Aaron Finch, the 50-over player, where he's just stood down from that. His T20 stats in the last couple of years have been excellent. He's a very experienced T20 cricketer and a very good captain as well. So they pretty much look like they got every base covered. There has been a slight change. Someone like Josh Hazelwood 5 years ago would say he's a bit predictable. He's length. You know, everyone said, don't bowl length, you get belted out of the ground. But Hazelwood is quick enough to bowl length. And the point that Freddie was making about pace, you have to be quick enough to do that. And he is absolutely, and he hits that splice of the bat, a little bit like Chris Wokes. And he's the #1 ranked bowler in T20 cricket in the world. So he is an absolute threat, which 5 years ago you wouldn't have said, but he's improved, Cummins, Stark. They're a top side.
They've got some firepower too with the bat, though. You think of Wade's done well finishing when he's not running in the way of Mark Wood. You got Tim David and Glenn Maxwell, so they're not shy of giving it a bit of a biff.
No, I mean they look a strong, well-rounded side, don't they? In home conditions, they've got firepower with the ball. They've got a bit of variety in the middle overs, and they've got more hitting potential. I just mentioned New Zealand there and wondered about their firepower with the bat. You wouldn't say that's an issue for Australia. So I think they're probably justifiable favourites on the book, but it's really a really open tournament. I'd expect them to go through those group stages.
My 4 overs of wrist spin, if not more, if you're Afghanistan, would be the vital ones against Australia. There's one area against Australia. You look at Stoinis. I think Adil's done him quite a few times with the wrong, and maybe Mitch Marsh. They're quite robotic and hit through the line, and you have to be a little bit more wristy against wrist spin. I think they would be my wrist spin overs as a skipper against Australia would be like gold dust.
But also, I mean, Australia, the conditions, the Optus Stadium yesterday looked like you could hit through the ball quite nicely still. The bounce is lovely, isn't it? It's not quite like playing in UAE or indeed subcontinent against wrist spin. So while I agree with you, I don't think it's quite as an issue as it might be elsewhere.
The big change for Australia from the last tournament is that Steve Smith was starting for Australia in the UAE. Now, it might be that he isn't starting in this World Cup, and that's due to merge with Tim David, which is really interesting, just almost politically for a player as significant as Smith, who's obviously been arguably the best test batsman potentially ever, and so dominant in that format for the last 10 years. But the fact that he might not be starting in this World Cup is kind of indicative of maybe the way that the game is going, and the fact that someone like Tim David, who hasn't played a first-class game, is potentially the one who's going to take his spot in the side. It's just interesting, I think, on that level. But you look at Australia, who won it last year in conditions that they weren't particularly well suited to. This year, they're now at home, and they've got David in there instead of Smith, and I would say that is an upgrade. they do look really dangerous. But Ath's completely right. It's a very open tournament. I don't think anyone is sort of a clear favourite, really. I mean, if you head into a game, probably between the major sides, no one probably starts as more than 60-40 favourites in any given game, which sort of sums up how, you know, it's only a little bit more than a coin cost. Yeah, coin cost.
I mean, your point, Freddie, about Tim David is probably a good way of segueing into the list of the best players, Wardy, that Wisden.
Yeah, go for it.
Because, you know, this is Freddie and his muckers at CricViz that have come up with this list. And it's quite an interesting list because Tim David is there. And that would be based very much around his, you know, performances in domestic cricket, but even so, relatively recent performances. And it's interesting for all kinds of reasons for some of the great players that are not there as much as anything else.
Well, no Kohli, no Rohit, no Barb, for example. So come on, what are you playing at?
You throw me under the bus there, Wardy.
Yep.
Well, I think that, you know, there are, I think as T20 has evolved, we have, you know, people have become slightly more sophisticated in terms of how they think of numbers. And it's not necessarily just someone's batting average that indicates how good they are. And I think that our match impact measure, which these ratings are built off, tries to cut through that a little bit. It's about the impact that you have on games. And sometimes that can be a very short innings. I mean, the other day in the T20 series between England and Pakistan, Asif Ali got 13 off 3 balls. Rizwan got 80 odd off 66. Now, you could argue very strongly that Asif's was a more impactful innings, given that he scored so quickly at such a short amount of time. And that's essentially what this measure tries to do. And it's a slightly more modern way, I guess, of looking at numbers. And with regards to sort of, I suppose, the emphasis on domestic cricket, the key thing there is that outside of World Cups in particular, some of these T20 leagues, particularly the IPL and the PSL, are of a very high standard. Whereas often in bilateral series between international teams, you'll have a lot of players rested. So yes, David has done it domestically, so I should say he started his international career very well. Doing it in the IPL is often amongst the very highest standard of T20 cricket there is. So it's a pretty good indicator of how that player will do when they make the step up. And I'll put my neck on the line and say I think Tim David will have a good World Cup. In these conditions in Australia, he's a fantastic hitter. And it's a role that's very difficult to do. We're talking about that with Ben Stokes coming in the middle and power hitting from ball one. Tim David is someone who does that really well.
Can I just pick your brain on the number one on that list, Rashid Khan? My gut feel is that his role and the way people play him has changed over the years. A huge impact for a number of years. Would I be right in thinking people just try and sit on him now and happy that he goes 4 overs, 1 for 25 or something? And how impactful is that? Does he need captaining more? So does Afghanistan need to bring the field up and say to the opposition, you're our gun bowler, we need you to take wickets? Or are they happy for him just to go at 6 runs and over? Because wickets in T20 cricket are not as impactful as maybe in a test match.
Well, it's a good question. And the same thing really happened with Narain. You know, players just decided to just play him out. With Afghanistan in particular, it's really interesting how they use him. Unlike necessarily teams in domestic cricket, they actually choose to hold his overs back till later in the innings. They generally don't often introduce him until the 9th, 10th over, and often then have, you know, of the last 10 overs, 4 of them can be from Rashid, and it means that generally he has to be attacked more. And I think there's a little element of this with, I remember sort of during the years when Lionel Messi and Ronaldo kept winning Ballon d'Ors, it almost just became a bit predictable and boring. I mean, the same thing with Rashid Khan, like it's quite easy to forget how good he consistently is. And if you do take 1 for 24, 2 for 24 week in, week out, and sometimes he takes more than that and contributes with the bat, you know, that's a hell of a performance. And it's just because he keeps doing it, I think sometimes we maybe take him a bit for granted. But yeah, he's a hell of a player, and I think he is the deserving number one, and he keeps banging it out year in, year out.
I suppose just looking at that list, a few interesting things, a number of people who are not going to be playing for various reasons. Just off the top of my head, where's Narain, Russell, Bairstow, Archer, Hetmeyer, of course, who we've already touched on.
Bumrah.
And Bumrah there, yeah, number 4. And then the other thing that struck me was the point Freddie was making about the difference between domestic and international or ICC rankings. You know, if you looked at the top 10, I just looked at the list the other day. People are not on it in batting terms. Babar Azam, Markram, Mann, Finch, Conway. bowlers, Zampa, Shamsi, Tikshana, Mujib. So, it's, as Freddie said, it's quite a different way of looking at it, and gives you a different set of players. And then the kind of cricketers that you would think are the great multi-format players of the modern age, like Ashwin and Cummins, Rohit, Kohli, these guys don't feature either. So it's a very interesting list, and just suggests to me how this particular format is kind of moving away into its own little sphere, or has moved away into its own little sphere, more so than the other formats. Would you say that's fair comment, Freddie?
Yeah, I think there's two things that you touched on there. Firstly, the sort of emphasis on domestic cricket, as you've written about before at length, that T20 has moved the game away from being a game based on nation v nation to club v club. So therefore, a greater emphasis on domestic cricket there probably makes sense. It's very, T20 has evolved. It's become more and more of its own sport, and it's become less and less like 50-over cricket and certainly Test cricket. So the fact that there are fewer players who are multi-format players in this list, I think, is illustrative of the fact that it's just a game that has evolved on its own and to become a very specific type of cricket now that's very different. And it's very hard to be a multi-format player, particularly be a very good T20 player whilst also being a good Test player. So I think, it reflects two sort of trends in the modern game, really.
So basically, Freddie, CricViz and Freddie Wilde are saying that Kohli and Rohit are not very good at T20 cricket. That's our tweet to push this podcast.
I'd like to say that's definitely not the case. And particularly, I'd also just on that, I think that those two players in Australian conditions, I think, Nat, you touched on it, in the UAE last year, India lacking a bit of intent at the top of the order. I think that the UAE wasn't particularly well suited to those guys, but I think KL Rahul, Rohit and Virat are good back foot players, good players of pace bowling, and I think as a result, and I'm covering myself here, they're going to do well in this World Cup.
And the one we've hardly spoken about is Kumar Yadav. I mean, he would have to be the form horse in T20 cricket at the moment. He just seems to be belting absolutely everywhere. So keep an eye on him in Australia as well.
The other name I'm just going to
quite high up in that list of players. And we do think Butler and him are two high batters that we've got.
Syria Kumar, Yadav 6, Butler at 2. But I want to quickly talk about a Pakistani bowler, Nas, because we really enjoyed that 7-game series that we witnessed in Lahore and Karachi. Shaheen Shafridi was absent, but I saw something today that the PCB have said he's fit, and perhaps also Fakhar Zaman. Now, we know the failings of Pakistan in that series, and it was reliant too heavily on 2 batters. But if they do get runs on the board or have to defend a small total, their bowling firepower is immense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing the tweet about Fakhar Zaman, but I was surprised at the time when they announced their squad that they had Shan Masood in the squad and Fakhar Zaman as a reserve. I would have done the other way, and like England have done with the likes of Jordan, Livingston, and a few, if you're injured, get them in the squad, Wokes, and then let them prove their fitness, or the other way round. So I'd have gone that way because I think he gives them another destructive option at number 3 that Shan Masood doesn't. But Shaheen Shafridi, up front, as we saw in the India-Pakistan game in Dubai last time when he blew away India's top order, he is absolutely box office. Not just the wickets. I just like the way he plays the game. He plays with a smile on his face, his celebrations, he swings the ball up front, he's quick, he's hostile, and he's a very good death bowler. So, you add him to the bowling reserves that we saw in the series against England. Their bowling is not going to be their problem. With their batting at the moment, they're heavily reliant on 2 batters. And you'd have to bowl very, very well just to be reliant on 2 batters. So hopefully Fakhar Zaman will be fit, and somehow they get him in to the playing 11.
Just that list we were referring to, I should mention that it's from Wisden magazine. That comes out on the 13th of October, and you can get your copy if you go to wisden.com. Right, finally, who's winning this one, Ath? It's a difficult question. Who are you pinning your £5 to?
Well, if I'm a punter, I got to look for value, you see. So I'm going to just take a bit of a flyer. I'm going to look outside the front 3 and go for South Africa as a bit of a dark horse to finally break, a duck in these events, and I'll probably be proved to be completely wrong. But at least I've got value for my fiver at about, what are they, Freddie?
8 to
1, something like that.
8 to 1.
Yeah.
Who are you putting your fiver on, Freddie?
Well, after I've stolen my guess, because I was going to go with South Africa as well. In the absence of value, I'll go boring then and say Australia. I think that they won it in the UAE. They're going to win it in home conditions. I would have liked to go with South Africa, but I haven't done that.
Nas, final one.
I mean, Australia are the favourites, and England just beat them yesterday. So England are going to win the World Cup. You heard it here first on the Sky Cricket podcast.
Thank you very much for listening. The World Cup gets underway with games in that pre-qualifying I was mentioning earlier. It's Namibia against Sri Lanka, Netherlands, UAE. That's in Geelong, actually, on Sunday the 16th. First time we'll see England in action in the World T20 will be the 22nd of October against Afghanistan in Perth. Should be a fabulous World Cup.